Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. A ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas has been agreed with the return of all hostages. Trump's picks for Attorney General and Secretary of State face the US Senate as Washington prepares security for next week's inauguration. And South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol is arrested and sent to a detention center near Seoul 6 weeks after attempting to impose martial law. To our top story, and a ceasefire deal has been reached between Israel and Hamas. The agreement includes a return of hostages on both sides and a gradual withdrawal of Israeli forces from central Gaza. Qatar's foreign ministry is due to hold a press conference in Doha imminently. We can now go live to Tel Aviv to speak to our correspondent there, Sarah Coates. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. Reports from the last 15 minutes from Axios and other news organizations suggest a deal has been agreed between Hamas and Israel over a ceasefire. What are we hearing? What do we know?
Hello there, Leigh Ann. That is certainly right. It is being widely reported here in Israeli media that a deal has finally been reached after 15 months of fighting and more than 46,000 people killed in Gaza. What we do know is that this would be a three-phase deal. The first phase of the deal, it would last for 6 weeks. It would see 33 of these Israeli hostages released. They would be women, children, men over the age of 50, and the sick and the elderly. Of course, this is still breaking news. There is still no formal announcement made on this, but as you mentioned, we can expect that to happen in the minutes, in potentially the hours to come. It is expected to be announced by Qatar's Prime Minister in Doha, where these negotiations have been ongoing now for days. But certainly, once again, good news. After 15 months of fighting, it does appear that this long war that has killed more than 46,000 people in Gaza could be coming to an end. Now, we also do understand that Israel's Foreign Minister Gideon Shah, he has been in Europe on a trip. He's cut that trip short. He is on his way back to Israel because tomorrow there will be a cabinet vote to push this through. It is expected to pass with a majority. So once again, breaking news. It does appear as though a deal has finally been made, Leigh Ann.
I know that you did mention that an official announcement has not been made, but could be imminent from the Qatari Prime Minister. Any idea when we could be expecting him to speak? And is it significant that he is holding this press conference?
Well, of course it is significant, but this is where the discussions have been taking place. Qatar, throughout this entire process, has been a key mediator in all of this, so it does make sense that he would be making this announcement. As I mentioned, we can expect it in the coming minutes, the coming hours, but certainly, once again, good news. After 15 months of fighting, it would appear that this war is coming to an end. We do know that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, over the last few minutes, he's been holding consultations with his negotiating team who were there in Doha. This is the head of the Shin Bet and also the Mossad spy agency. They've been there hammering out the details of this deal. So certainly throughout the day there was a lot of cautious optimism. Of course, we've been seeing many of these deals, many of these attempts, I should say, going on for the last few months. Many of them have fallen over at the last minute, and this is why there was so much cautious optimism here in Israel, with many people believing that this deal could potentially see the same fate as others. But it would appear as though this one has finally got over the line, and as you mentioned, we are waiting to hear from that announcement from Qatar's Prime Minister very shortly.
And do we know how the Israeli public have been reacting to this deal?
There are certainly mixed reactions here in Israel. Of course, we can expect a lot of jubilation once this announcement is made there in Doha. People have been waiting a very long time, especially the family members of these hostages who are still being held in the Gaza Strip, to see their loved ones returned. But in saying that, there, of course, will be some sadness. There was quite a large rally here in Tel Aviv, Leigh Ann, overnight, people calling for the release of all hostages in one round, not just the release of 33 hostages during the first round. There is a lot of concern among some family members of especially male soldiers and other men being held in Gaza who would be set free during the second phase of this deal, that it might actually fall over before then and they may not see their loved ones released. So in saying that, there will be a lot of emotion here in Israel. There will be a lot of happiness, but also, on the other hand, there will be a lot of concern among the family members of those who will not be being released during this first round, that they may not see their loved ones come out of Gaza at all. But in saying that, hospitals here in Israel have been prepared to be on standby to receive these captives. We can expect once this deal, if this deal does pass through the Israeli cabinet, that it would come into effect within the next 24 to 48 hours. So certainly critical hours ahead here in the Middle East as people wait to see what happens.
Yes, indeed. As you say, just critical hours. Trump has reacted to the news on Truth Social. What role has the incoming Trump admin and, in particular, his incoming special envoy for the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, played in brokering this deal, Sarah?
Well, we do need to remember what we did hear from the President-elect Donald Trump when he was re-elected, and that was there would be hell to pay if these hostages are not released by the time he comes back into the White House. And that deadline is fast approaching. We also do need to remember that his new Mideast envoy had a very hard talk with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu around a week ago, and he's really being seen as the one who sort of pushed him into this deal, because what we do need to remember is Benjamin Netanyahu has had many opportunities to actually broker a deal. He's been accused many times of torpedoing a deal for his own political gain. So certainly Mr. Trump is being seen as really a leader here, as someone who's really pushed this deal through. And also in saying that it will be a very good legacy for the outgoing President Joe Biden to actually get this while he's still in the Oval Office. So certainly, once again, critical hours ahead. We are waiting on this announcement from Qatar's Prime Minister. That is expected to happen any moment now from Doha, and we certainly will be following that press conference very closely. Leigh Ann.
Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv, thank you so much for bringing us that breaking news. So we're just hearing a Gaza ceasefire deal has been reached between Hamas and Israel. More on that throughout the show. To Washington now, and there is heightened political tension and an increased threat of violence in the US Capitol as security teams prep for the inauguration on Monday. The president-elect will be sworn in as high-level supporters and tech CEOs watch on. It's just 6 months since an attempt on Donald Trump's life, which saw security protocol tighten. Caroline Malone reports from Washington.
Take a look at what happened.
A security failure made Donald Trump vulnerable. And when a suspect shot at him, he was almost killed at a campaign rally in Pennsylvania in July. A second suspect planning to assassinate him was caught in September. After a divisive political campaign, there's a heightened level of security alert for Inauguration Day, when the president-elect will be sworn in. 25,000 law enforcement officers, including police and military, will be on site to secure the area. Nearly 50 kilometres of black fencing has been put around the Capitol, and security checkpoints will process thousands of spectators expected to attend. Once Mr. Trump officially becomes president again, celebrations will move from Congress to the White House, where bleachers and security gates have been constructed.
Take over, Elijah.
Billionaire Elon Musk, who donated many millions of dollars to the Trump campaign, is attending the inauguration. He will co-lead an efficiency department, or DOGE, tasked with reviewing government budgets to cut back spending under the Trump administration. There are also reports that other tech execs, Sam Altman of OpenAI, Jeff Bezos of Amazon and aerospace company Blue Origin, and Mark Zuckerberg of Meta, will also be watching front and centre on Monday. All have donated to the Trump-Vance inaugural committee setting up events. As the final security preparations proceed outside, hearings are being held inside Congress for Donald Trump's desired cabinet appointees. Pete Hegseth, his pick for Defence Secretary, faced questions on Tuesday about his inexperience and lewd behaviour. Senate hearings for other picks continue this week. Caroline Malone, Al Arabiya News, Washington.
We can now catch up with our correspondent Benji Hyer. Benji, what's the Washington reaction been to the Gaza ceasefire?
Well, we're expecting to hear, in fact, from President Joe Biden tonight. He makes his official farewell address to the nation, his last chance to try to shape his legacy before he steps out of office. And, of course, Donald Trump retakes the White House. And that speech, I presume, will now point a little bit more towards Joe Biden's foreign policy legacy, given that this deal has been agreed under his watch. But ultimately, it will also be all eyes on the president-elect. You spoke before about his post recently on Truth Social, where he praised his special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, who has been in meetings with his Israeli counterparts in the past couple of weeks. And I think there'll be a view within Washington that this is going to be seen favourably from Donald Trump's perspective, because ultimately, if this deal holds, if there is eventually peace in that region, he can try to take credit for that, given that his team was getting ready to take over as this deal was pushed through. But equally, if it collapses and the truce doesn't hold, he can ultimately point towards the Biden administration and brand this as a failure of a deal. But ultimately, there's also, relief. We're talking about a conflict here that has raged on for many, many months, that the Biden administration has tried tirelessly to end, and eventually it has managed to do that. And I'm sure there'll be sighs of relief within the White House, given that this is one of Joe Biden's last aims on his foreign policy agenda.
Benji, as you said there, Gaza's ceasefire deal has been reached between Hamas and Israel. We do know Joe Biden gives his farewell speech this evening. He's been in politics for a very long time. What can we expect from that this evening?
Well, it's not just a farewell address to end his presidency. This is also a farewell address to cap off almost a half century of political service for Joe Biden, a half century, a career in politics. And as I said before, sort of a last chance to try to communicate to the country and to shape his legacy before the historians take over and be the judge of his one-term presidency. I think he would like to be remembered as the man that tried to unite the country, who passed major pieces of legislation, who rescued the economy post-COVID-19, and who defeated Trump and rescued America from Donald Trump, not once but twice. But given what we've seen in the past couple of months with his heir, Vice President Kamala Harris, actually losing that election to the former president, that is not what Joe Biden may be remembered for. Effectively, he has become the bridge from Trump 1 to Trump 2. And with Donald Trump retaking the White House shortly, he will have the opportunity to reverse many of the achievements and accomplishments that we've seen under Joe Biden's administration. So I think that the sitting president, the outgoing president, will want to use this opportunity to make sure that the closing judgment on his political career is not just one of defeat and of reversal.
Benji, I just want to switch gears slightly here to cabinet nominees. We spoke to you yesterday during a Pete Hegseth hearing. Marco Rubio and Pam Bondi facing the grilling today. Remind us which cabinet positions they both nominated for and how they've come across during those hearings so far. There were a few protesters during them too.
That's right, they were, in the same way there was for the Defence Secretary nominee Pete Hegseth yesterday. But whilst he took much of the spotlight, this morning in Washington, we have had 6 hearings almost take place simultaneously. The most high profile of which was, as you mentioned, Pamela Bondi for Attorney General, who spoke about making America safe again and pledging that there will not be an enemies list, she says, within the Department of Justice, a reference there to the fears of retribution that could unfold under Donald Trump as he seeks to potentially weaponize the Department of Justice that has for many years investigated him. She wasn't the first preference, by the way, for the president-elect for this position. Former Congressman Matt Gaetz was his pick until he stepped out of the race amid various controversies and allegations of sexual misconduct. She has faced a great degree of scrutiny over her close connection to Donald Trump, the fact that she served as his lawyer, for example, during his impeachment proceedings and during that trial into his attempts to overturn the 2020 election result, which he lost. Then just down the hall, Marco Rubio, the senator who Donald Trump wants to be Secretary of State. He has used his opening remarks to emphasize the need to prioritize America in foreign policy, harking back to Donald Trump's famous phrase about America first and making America great again. On Ukraine, he says the official position would be for that war to end, and for that there need to be concessions on both sides, he says. And also he touched upon that ceasefire agreement, which has happened in the past couple of moments. He was met with protests, both in English and Spanish. What is interesting, I'll just add briefly about Marco Rubio, is, number one, his very hawkish policy positions on China, on Iran, for example, and on Cuba, a fierce critic of Cuba as a Cuban American himself, and someone who therefore might choose to reverse the announcement that we saw from Joe Biden just yesterday to remove Cuba from the list of state sponsors of terrorism under the United States. We actually saw that go the other way under Donald Trump, so a bit of a flip-flopping there. And what is also interesting about Marco Rubio, the other detail, is his change in terms of the relationship he's had with Donald Trump. This is someone who previously called the president-elect unfit for office, a con artist, accused him of having small hands, if you remember that, in 2016. And in response, Mr. Trump derided Marco Rubio on several occasions. They now find themselves allies, and one may be working for the other in a couple of weeks' time if Marco Rubio is approved by his colleagues in the Senate.
Benji, Hyer in Washington, thank you so much for joining us and bringing us US reaction to that Gaza ceasefire deal, which has been reached between Hamas and Israel. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making headlines today. The highest level of alert is back in parts of Los Angeles as the death toll from the wildfires rises to 25. The National Weather Service has issued red flag warnings as fire-wary residents brace for strong winds that are expected to exceed the 15 miles per hour limit. Such strong winds can lead to an uncontrollable spread of new fires, even as firefighters battle existing flames. Iran's Navy has unveiled its first signals intelligence ship. The Zagros is equipped with electronic sensors and the ability to intercept cyber operations and conduct intelligence monitoring. Iran has plans to raise its military budget by around 200%. It comes amid a time of high tensions with Israel and the US under incoming President Donald Trump. Now it's believed 78 bodies have been pulled out of an illegal gold mine in South Africa. Around 82 survivors have emerged, but hundreds remain trapped underground. The abandoned mine was illegally accessed and has been the scene of a tense standoff between the miners and the authorities. And health experts have said the term obesity needs a more accurate and nuanced definition as the demand for weight loss drugs soar. The Lancet journal has recommended doctors consider overall health rather than just a body mass index. The report suggests separating preclinical and clinical obesity in order to tackle the global issue and ensure optimal treatment options. To South Korea now, and Yoon Suk Yeol has become the country's first sitting president to be detained and sent to a detention center near Seoul in a massive law enforcement operation on Wednesday. The development marks the latest twist in a political crisis that was triggered by Yoon's failed attempt to impose martial law last month and which has shaken confidence in the democratic integrity of South Korea. Here's what Yoon had to say earlier.
Today, when I saw them break into the security area using firefighting equipment, I decided to respond to the Corruption Investigation Office's investigation, despite it being an illegal investigation to prevent unsavory bloodshed. However, that does not mean that I am acknowledging the investigation of the CIO. I couldn't help but feel it is deplorable to witness the way these truly illegal proceedings are being forcibly carried out with an invalid warrant.
In a video message, suspended President Yoon Suk Yeol said he decided to comply to avoid bloodshed, even though he didn't agree with the legal basis of the arrest warrant. He had been holed up for weeks in his residence with many of his supporters gathered outside. And this was the second attempt by authorities to try to arrest him amid a standoff with Yoon's security service. And this is a criminal investigation that centers on whether Yoon committed alleged insurrection for a failed martial law declaration on December 3rd. There were more than 1,000 officers involved in this operation, some reportedly using wire cutters to remove barbed wire placed by the Presidential Security Service. The Corruption Investigation Office said Yoon was brought into custody about 5 hours after investigators arrived at the compound. And Yoon is set to be held in a detention center near the CIO headquarters while he's being questioned. And the anti-corruption agency has 48 hours to request a court order to formally arrest him. And the leader of the opposition Democratic Party has called this arrest the first step in restoring order. Last month, Yoon declared martial law but was backed down after lawmakers voted it down. It plunged the country into a political crisis, and Yoon has had his presidential powers suspended when Parliament impeached him. On Thursday, we're also expecting the second session of the impeachment trial. The Constitutional Court has up to 6 months to decide whether to remove Yoon or reinstate him. Fresh elections must be held within 2 months if he's removed. He did not show up for the first hearing on Tuesday. It's unclear if he will show up on Thursday, but the court says in any case it will proceed without him.
Let's have a look at some other stories making headlines from around the world today. Striking a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine may take longer than incoming US President Donald Trump first envisioned. His advisors have said they are looking at a timeline of months, a stark contrast to Trump's promise to solve the war on day one of his first term in office. As the timeline extends, Russia continues to make significant battlefield gains. Australia has summoned the Russian ambassador after reports that a Melbourne man has been killed in Russian captivity. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is warning of strong action if Oscar Jenkins is harmed and has asked Russia about his well-being. Jenkins is a teacher who was serving alongside Ukraine's military before his capture as a prisoner of war. A record 36.8 million tourists flocked to Japan last year. A weak currency and government-backed promotions have contributed to the increase. The country has an ambitious target of nearly doubling those numbers to 60 million visitors per year by 2030. And a team of researchers from Penn State have issued a warning for pet owners who kiss their dogs. The study reveals the household animals are overlooked spreaders for zoonotic pathogens, which include antibiotic-resistant salmonella. The team have urged dog owners to avoid kissing their pets and stress the importance of washing their hands regularly after contact. Let's return to our top story, and a ceasefire deal has been reached between Israel and Hamas. We can now speak to Professor Kamal Hawash, a Palestinian academic and an analyst. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. I really appreciate it. An official announcement could be made imminently from the Qatari Prime Minister. When are we expecting him to speak?
Well, we are told it's only a matter of hours before that happens. Clearly, even though we are told that a deal is reached, until somebody comes out and announces that it's been reached, we still await confirmation. So I think certainly Palestinians are looking forward to hearing that a deal has been reached, because their suffering has been indescribable, and we want to see the end of the daily killings by Israel.
Professor, you mentioned a deal there. As you said, no official announcement yet. It's what we're waiting for. But what is possibly in this deal?
Well, it will be that the Israeli troops begin to withdraw from the main population areas towards the east. They would leave the Netzarim corridor, which divides the north and south. We're not clear yet whether they would leave what's called the Philadelphia corridor completely, but all the indications are that that's going to happen. But that on the first day of this deal, that 3 Israeli hostages will be released, followed by another 4 at the end of the first week. And at the same time, you begin to see Palestinian prisoners released by Israel. And then things should continue beyond that there would be no further attacks by either side, if you like. And then they begin to move towards a second stage, where they begin to get much further in the release of most of the hostages, if not all of them, and that Israel would leave the Gaza Strip, then leading to a stage where the question of rebuilding for those particularly who will be moving back north to their, it's difficult to say to their homes because Israel has destroyed most of them, but to the areas where they used to live, so that they can begin to rebuild their lives. And also from the first day, it is suggested that there would be 600 or so trucks a day going in with aid to help the Palestinians who have suffered terribly at the hands of Israel, who has tried to starve them to death.
That's what I wanted to ask you about, rebuilding. What does the future look like now, after you said things have been extremely difficult, aid's been difficult to get in, people are starving to death? What's going to happen?
Well, if things go according to plan, then the Rafah crossing would be open. In the first phases, temporary homes, accommodation, and more tents would be sent in, together with relief, both medical relief and in terms of food and other needs. And during that period, and that is something we also need to consider, there would be a question of who rules Gaza after the guns have stopped. And that isn't clear as yet. But that is important before the question of rebuilding starts. But when you consider that tens of thousands of homes have been destroyed, most of the medical facilities, almost all the universities, many of the schools, it's a huge task that's going going to cost billions, but it is badly needed if we can get to a semblance of normality for these people, and for them to focus on the positive things of going back to some normal life, while the undoubted hatred that they've developed towards their oppressor will take even longer to curtail, because those who, when you consider that over 20,000 children have been killed, that there are many, many orphans. These are not, those who remain will not quickly forget what's happened. So yes, it's important to have rebuilding, electricity supplies, water, and so on, and also the ability to move in and out of Gaza would be something that they would very much be looking forward to, after they displayed unbelievable resilience in remaining on their land, and even though Israel has moved them from north to south to east to west at its will, which is something that they're not going to forget in a hurry.
Professor, Netanyahu hasn't ruled out continued fighting after this first phase. What do you make of this? Is the ceasefire deal, or the deal we could reach, possibly fragile? How do we know that it's going to be stuck to and things are going to work in accordance?
Yeah, first of all, let's get to the deal. Let's get to a real ceasefire so people can have some relief. And then I think the various parties that have worked so hard, like Qatar and Egypt, and indeed the Americans, with a new administration coming in, Trump wants quiet. He wants an end to this. And I suggest that part of the reason why Israel eventually moved to get to this deal was the prospect of Trump coming in, and he promised, there'd be hellfire if the deal wasn't reached, and this means that both the Palestinian side and the Israeli side have got to move in a way that takes this out of the list of priorities that Trump has, because he has many. But any ceasefire is fragile. We've seen what happened in Lebanon, particularly in terms of Israel showing complete disregard for any agreements on the pretense that it's all to do with its security. But what we look forward to is, one, an end to this, the rebuilding, but then we need to move to a real effort to bring an end to this conflict that meets the rights of the Palestinian people. Because unless that happens, no amount of normalization, no amount of aggression by Israel against the Palestinians is going to bring peace to Israelis after 76, 77 years of the creation of their state. That's something they should think about. What is it that will bring them peace? And it's only when the Palestinian people attain their rights.
Professor, I wanted to talk to you about Donald Trump. You mentioned him there, and he's obviously incoming soon, and his special envoy to the Middle East has played a role in brokering this very deal that we're talking about. Do you think that Trump is responsible for this ceasefire coming over the line, if it does, possibly?
Well, I think the Americans, as I say, the Qataris, the Egyptians have been working really hard for months to try and bring this deal together. And indeed, President Biden, who outlined this, or he presented this as a deal back in May. So it's not just Trump, but I think the prospect of him coming, and that single phrase where he said, unless the hostages are released, there will be, all hell to pay, if you like, made focus people's minds. And it's always been the case that Israel had run out of targets, to be quite honest. So why continue killing and destroying? Even just before I came to talk to you, a Palestinian journalist has been killed within minutes of a ceasefire being announced. So I think that Trump's stature will have played a role. He sent his envoy to Israel and indeed to Qatar and so on, and he's insisting that this is taken off his desk as an issue that he has to deal with, when he's got many other issues, including Russia and Ukraine, what's happened in Los Angeles, as well as other areas, in the cost of living in the United States. He thinks about tariffs. He's got many issues that he wants to bring in very soon after his inauguration. So this will help make sure that this is taken off his desk. But at the same time, and this is really what I'm interested in, is it will bring relief to the Palestinian people in Gaza. But in addition to that, I still hope that the International Criminal Court will be bringing Netanyahu and other Israeli leaders in terms of the various, the warrants that have been issued, because there has to be accountability. It isn't just about ending this. And quite honestly, why isn't Israel paying back reparations for the destruction of Gaza as well? That is something that the world should not forget. It was Israel that destroyed Gaza, not the Palestinian people.
Trump has been on Truth Social. He said, with this deal in place, my national security team, through the efforts of Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, will continue to work closely with Israel and our allies to make sure Gaza never again becomes a terrorist haven. We will continue promoting peace through strength throughout the region as we build upon the momentum of this ceasefire to further expand the historic Abraham Accords. What is your thoughts on what we just heard from Donald Trump there?
Yes. I mean, notice that he didn't mention Israel's occupation of Palestine, which is the main cause of the continuing conflict. He's focused on the Abraham Accords. They want to bring Saudi Arabia into these. Saudi Arabia has insisted there must be a Palestinian state before it normalizes relations with Israel. So his focus should be on how to end the occupation, how to dismantle the illegal settlements, because they're the biggest impediment to peace, and that the Palestinians just need to get basic rights that every one of us wants to enjoy, of freedom, of justice, and of equality. Now, if his focus extends beyond supporting Israel in what it's trying to do now, which is to increase its presence in the West Bank, and to say to people like Smotrich, don't think about a greater Israel. Israel is basically historic Palestine, less the area that will be there for the Palestinian state to be created. And if the Israelis don't think that's enough, then they cannot look forward to a peaceful future while they occupy another people's lands in accordance with international law.
Professor Kamal Hyer, Palestinian academic, thank you so much for joining me this evening to speak to us about that breaking news.
Thank you.
A reminder of our top stories this evening. A ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas has been agreed with the return of all hostages. Trump's picks for Attorney General and Secretary of State face the U.S. Senate as Washington prepares security for next week's inauguration. And South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol has been arrested and sent to a detention center near Seoul 6 weeks after attempting to impose martial law. And that's all from us on W News this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Coming up next, a special interview with Binance CEO Richard Teng, followed by Riz Khan. And don't miss Tom Burgess-Watson with GNT. Good night and thank you for joining me.